Do you remember that feeling? The feeling of standing outside a door, even though you'd paid in full, prepared for months, and dreamed of the moment you'd step inside. But when you arrive, one cold glance and a polite sorry turn you into an outsider. The pain isn't from being refused, it's from knowing they believe you could never belong inside. That was the morning at TechSphere, the most prestigious tech conference of the year. Celeste Monroe walked into the red carpet lobby in a deep blue suit, her VIP pass glowing on her phone. She wasn't just an attendee, she was one of the top CEOs shaping the future of AI. But to the check-in clerk, it all boiled down to one half-mocking question. Are you part of the catering staff? Soft chuckles rippled nearby. A security manager approached, polite but firm. This area is for actual guests. I'll have to ask you to step aside. Celeste didn't argue. She didn't lower herself. She simply smiled, folded her phone, and walked away, quietly as if moving a single chess piece back into position. But you see, some people don't knock on doors. They buy the entire building. 3 days later, in the very same place where she had been stopped in the lobby, Celeste stepped onto the stage. No ticket. No introduction. Just one sentence that froze the entire room. 3 days ago, I was denied entry here. Today, I'm here as the new owner of TechSphere. And when she turned to smile at the security manager from that morning, the whole hall understood. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a declaration. The keys to every door sometimes belong to the very person you once underestimated. If you believe silence can sometimes be the strongest answer, hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Turn on the notification bell because sometimes the story you hear today could be the strength you need tomorrow. And now, let's go back to that defining moment, the morning at TechSphere where it all began. The central lobby of TechSphere glowed like a banquet of light. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from the high ceiling, scattering thousands of shimmering reflections onto the polished marble floor. The scent of freshly brewed Arabica mingled with expensive perfume, creating an atmosphere both luxurious and faintly suffocating. The click of high heels blended with the low hum of conversation from those long accustomed to being called the elite of the tech world. TechSphere wasn't just a conference. It was the key to the deepest inner circle of global technology. A place where handshakes in the back corridors could shift the course of an entire industry. Tickets couldn't be bought over the counter. They were sent directly to those the organizers deemed worthy of being here. Celeste Monroe entered as if she had been born to this place. A deep blue suit hugged her tall, slender frame. Glossy black heels clicked with precision, her gaze steady. On her phone, the QR code of her VIP pass glowed, a silent confirmation that she had been chosen. A few heads turned, eyes scanning her as though trying to recall if her face had graced the cover of some magazine. She walked straight to the check-in desk, where attendants in crisp white uniforms bowed slightly to each arriving guest. Behind them, a massive backdrop displayed the TechSphere logo alongside dozens of sponsor brands, a perfect stage for social media bragging rights. Celeste stopped and held out her phone. The attendant took it, eyes flicking over the screen before slowly looking up. The expression wasn't one of verifying a ticket. It was the look of someone trying to fit a misplaced puzzle piece into a picture they thought they knew. The attendant's lips curved, not quite a smile. The voice was soft, almost polite, yet laced with the precision of classification. Are you Yen with catering? Staff entrance is in the back. The clicking of heels ceased. Conversations nearby seemed to slow. From the line behind her, a few quiet chuckles rose. A couple of phones lifted, ready to capture a moment that could spread faster than the keynote itself. Celeste met the attendant's gaze without blinking. In that moment, all the years of standing outside doors of power came rushing back. The half-hearted handshakes, the polite but distant smiles, the "sorry, the list is full." Refusals that everyone knew were just rejections wrapped in legal safety. Not flinching, she tilted her head slightly, letting a faint smile play on her lips, the kind of smile learned only by those who have been underestimated too many times to count. Beneath that calm, a thought sparked. They just gave me a reason to come back, in a way they'll never see coming. The story was only beginning. The attendant maintained that thin smile, eyes flicking from her gleaming heels, up the sharp lines of her tailored suit, and pausing on her neatly pinned curls. It was a long enough glance to make clear that to them, this image didn't match their definition of VIP. From behind, a soft snicker broke out as if someone had just witnessed a private joke among the crowd. A hand lifted a phone, its screen glowing toward her. Not to capture a keepsake, but to record a funny moment, destined to be posted with a smug caption. Heavy measured footsteps echoed on the marble. The security manager arrived. Black uniform pressed crisp, tie knotted tight, his smile tailored for moments when professionalism had to be maintained. Yet behind it was the subtle edge of a blade. This area is for actual guests. I'll have to ask you to cooperate. Those 6 words, actual guests, tightened the air. It wasn't just a request, it was a way of erasing an entire person from the frame with a single period. Celeste didn't blink. She studied him, memorizing the lines on his face, the cadence of his voice, the rhythm of his breath. Her eyes remained calm, but there was a glint in them. Someone who had just found a reason and had no intention of letting it go. A taut pause followed. No one knew how she would respond. Argue? Explain? Hand over a business card to prove her place? She did the opposite. She closed her phone, smile intact, and took one step back. No defense, no furrowed brow. Just a composure so steady that those expecting drama began to feel oddly disappointed. Then she turned and walked through the bustling lobby, past the laughter, the clinking glasses, the endless camera clicks. Each step was measured, but in her mind, a plan had already begun to assemble its first pieces. Celeste knew that arguing here would only feed their momentary amusement. A well-placed counterstrike, however, would make them remember her for a lifetime. She pushed open the glass doors, letting the cold wind rush in. The daylight fell across her face, highlighting a faint smile. The kind you give when someone thinks they've told you a fresh insult you've heard 100 times before. If they thought this was the end, they had forgotten one truth. The best chess matches often start with a move that looks like retreat. Her heels clicked in an even rhythm, each step an unspoken countdown. The sound wasn't hurried, nor heavy, but enough for those in the lobby to feel her presence even after she had turned her back. Behind her, whispers rippled, like an electric current through the crowd. Some stifled laughter, holding their petty satisfaction in cupped hands, as though savoring a small, undeserved victory. Others stayed silent, their eyes following her, not from curiosity, but because something in her walk made them unable to look away. Celeste's hand met the cool glass, her reflection staring back. Shoulders square, chin lifted, not a trace of someone who had just been excluded from a place that should have been hers. In that instant, she knew her reaction wasn't just about pride, it was about strategy. Some battles are won instantly just to soothe the ego, but sometimes refusing to fight immediately is the way to build a far greater weapon. Surprise. And in the hands of someone who knows how to wait, surprise can be lethal. Outside, the late morning light spilled over the steps, catching dust motes in the air. Celeste descended, the breeze threading through her hair, carrying the scent of the streets and a hint of the distant sea. She wasn't in a hurry. Already the memory of this morning was rearranging itself into a story whose ending she would write herself. Across the street, a small cluster of photographers lingered. They didn't know who she was, but instinct told them that this walk, this look, would soon appear somewhere worth noting. One raised his camera, then lowered it, sensing the real shot hadn't happened yet. Celeste opened her car door and slid into the back seat. The window rose slowly, concealing her eyes, but not the thought running deep in her mind. She murmured to herself, almost in a whisper, "Not worth winning right away, but worth winning once and forever." The car pulled into traffic, leaving behind the glittering conference hall, and the people who had just handed her a kind of power money couldn't buy. The drive to act. And in just a few days, this very place would have to open its doors to her again. Not as a guest, but as the one who decided who got in. The afternoon light slanted through the wide glass panes, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. Celeste's office sat high on the 28th floor, where the entire city sprawled outside like a massive painting. The air still carried the echo of her engineering team's spirited debate about refining their voice recognition system. But the moment the door opened and Celeste stepped inside, the sound was sliced clean away, as if by an invisible blade. She set her bag on the desk, not bothering to remove her coat. Eyes followed her, not out of curiosity for news, but because everyone sensed something had just happened. A few chairs shifted, their wheels rolling audibly across the floor. The silence wasn't one of simple respect. It was the silence of people waiting for a story, unsure if they wanted to hear the beginning or the end. Celeste sat, her fingers brushing the warm teacup someone had left for her. She took a slow sip, her gaze fixed on the window where towers reflected the light like giant mirrors. No one dared break the moment. They all knew that when Celeste was silent, her mind was moving through something far more intricate than a business plan. From the corner, her assistant, Nora, leaned closer and asked quietly, "Just loud enough for all to hear. The conference didn't go well?" Celeste set the cup down, turning the saucer slightly as though rolling invisible dice. Her voice was no louder than usual, yet it carried a weight that pulled the whole room forward. "I went there to confirm something, and now I'm certain. At that place, not everyone with a ticket is a true guest." A chair creaked, then stilled. They understood the subtext. In this world, not a true guest had nothing to do with printed lists. It was about perception, or more precisely, exclusion by those who decided who belonged. Celeste said no more. She simply reached into her desk, pulled out a small note, wrote a few sharp, precise words, folded it, and placed it beside her cup. Nora glanced but couldn't make out the writing, only the confident, deliberate stroke of the pen. The last light of the day slid across the floor, stretching Celeste's shadow toward the door. No one knew exactly what she was thinking, but they all sensed this afternoon would not end like any other. And they were right. Within hours, what Celeste had begun to set in motion would unleash a wave that, once it hit, no one at TechSphere could withstand. Nora, unable to mask her curiosity, leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper as if afraid someone might hear from the hall. "What are you going to do?" Celeste turned the cup in her hands, letting the warmth seep through her fingers as though testing the readiness of an idea. Her reply was slow, each word carefully weighed. "Find out who the real guests are here." The air in the room tightened. No one asked further questions, but their eyes said it all. This was not going to be a story that ended at the check-in desk. Celeste leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the glass panes. The morning's scene was still vivid in her mind, but it wasn't the first time. She remembered the conference 3 years ago, when her company had just won an innovation award. Even though she had been invited on stage to accept it, security stopped her at the backstage entrance, mistaking her for a delivery worker. No one apologized, only a flat, "You may go in after rechecking the list." And the time at a European Tech Expo, when organizers placed her in the product demo area, even though she was a keynote speaker. The reason? The VIP section is full, but your booth might attract more visitors. A smooth turn of phrase, framing it as a favor while quietly shoving her to the margins. She had learned something. The most insidious discrimination doesn't come in blunt words. It lives in the art of polite dismissal, in glances that flick away too soon, smiles that curl a fraction too tightly, and questions so harmless on the surface they can slam a door in your face. Celeste set her cup down, her eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Nora, I need everything on TechSphere, not the event, the people behind it." Nora nodded, quickly pulling out her tablet. The room fell silent again, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of keys, the drum roll to an unseen performance. One young engineer, still hesitant, asked quietly, "Are you planning to get back at them?" Celeste's mouth curved, not in confirmation, but with a shade of irony. "No, I'm planning to invite them to my house." She wasn't talking about a physical house. She meant turning TechSphere into her own territory. In her mind, this wasn't just about reclaiming dignity, it was about teaching a lesson. And when Celeste Monroe decided to teach someone a lesson, she didn't use chalkboards. She used contracts and ownership papers. Outside, the sunlight shifted to a honeyed hue, sliding across the glass as if to remind her the time was near. Inside, her team began to realize the wave she was preparing wouldn't just shake TechSphere, it would swallow it whole. Celeste turned her chair toward her laptop. The white-blue glow lit her face, casting her features in a calm so deep it made her unreadable. On the screen, the TechSphere logo stood crisp and confident, just like the organization's belief in its place atop the tech world. Her cursor moved slowly as though navigating a maze. She hovered over the logo for several seconds. No one in the room even breathed too loudly. Then, a smile. Not the smile of someone beaten, nor the polite mask of someone covering a loss. It was the smile of a person who had seen another path, one her opponent would never imagine she could take. She typed a few search terms. Results poured in quickly as though the internet itself had been waiting to tell her the story behind TechSphere. Affiliate companies, executive bios, obscure financial articles, each new line sharpened her gaze. Nora stepped closer, peeking at the screen, but Celeste tilted her head slightly to block the view. "You'll know when the time comes," she said softly but firmly. Her fingers kept moving, opening new tabs. Connections between TechSphere and its partners emerged like invisible threads in a vast web. And then, one name surfaced again and again, an event management company running the entire operation. Celeste leaned in, resting her elbow on the desk, staring at the name. "There you are," she murmured, as if finding the final puzzle piece. No one knew exactly what she would do with it, but those who knew her well understood. Once she found the weak point, the only question left was how she would press it. She closed the extra tabs, leaving only the TechSphere logo on the screen. A reminder, not to fear, but to remember the target. Celeste shut the laptop. The soft click of the hinge was neat, deliberate, like the final period at the end of a paragraph. She stood, took her bag, and walked to the door without looking back. Before it closed behind her, she left a single sentence, enough to make Nora and the entire team shiver. I don't knock on doors, I buy the house. The door shut, leaving behind a room steeped in silence, the kind that falls when people realize the coming wave has already begun to form. The map lit up on the large office screen, its tangled lines spreading like a spider's web. At the center, the TechSphere logo glowed coldly, sending out dozens of branches, each one leading to a name, a company, an investment, and then splitting again into murkier, thinner strands. Not everyone could see the logic in it, but to Celeste, this was a language she spoke fluently, one not written in letters, but in power and money. The light from the screen caught her face, turning her eyes into two hard, cold rings of reflection. On the desk, her tea had gone cold, the faintest film of condensation clinging to the rim. She didn't look at it. All her focus was on the nodes in the web, places where real influence hid behind seemingly harmless names. Some names she knew well. A few had once invited her to speak at conferences, only to parade her as a diversity prop, never letting her near the real decisions. Others had smiled while barring her from entering just 3 days ago. In the quiet, the only sound was the slow, deliberate clicking of her mouse, hopping from one node to the next. Each click was like a scissor snip, peeling away the hidden strings from the mess. This power map was like a stage where everyone could see the curtain, but never the strings pulling behind it. And the irony was, those who thought they held the strings rarely knew who was truly pulling them. Celeste leaned forward, resting an elbow on the desk. From this angle, the lines on the screen looked like a maze with no exit. But she knew there was a hidden door. The only question was, when she would walk through it, and who she would leave on the other side. Beyond the glass wall, night had settled over the city, the streetlights casting long gold streaks over wet pavement. The scene reflected in her eyes, half real, half imagined, much like the plan taking shape in her mind. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard the security manager's voice. "This area is for real guests." To her, it was no longer an insult. It had become a password, a trigger for a new game, where she wouldn't just be a guest, she'd be the one writing the guest list. Her fingertip tapped the screen, zooming in on a small, overlooked square. A brief smile appeared. Sometimes, to drop the entire curtain, you only had to cut the smallest string. And Celeste had just found it. Thomas picked up on the second ring. His voice was low and steady, the kind that never hurried. "You looking to buy a ticket to the conference?" Celeste sat back in her chair, eyes locked on the corporate ownership chart glowing on her screen. One hand held the phone, the other flipped a file as if she were playing chess against an opponent who didn't yet know they were in the game. "No, I want to buy the door." On the other end, a soft chuckle, short but loaded. "That door costs a bit more than a ticket." Celeste didn't answer immediately. The sound of her keyboard filled the pause, mingled with the faint clink of Thomas sipping coffee. Between them, silence was just as clear as words. A power play had begun. "You know I'm not buying because I want it," Celeste said, her voice even but edged. "I'm buying because they think I can't." Thomas cleared his throat as though the words rang familiar. "You going in direct or through a cover?" Celeste tapped a pen against the desk, 3 slow beats like counting out a move. "Through a cover. No one needs to know. Until I decide they should." She turned her monitor toward Nora, revealing TechSphere's shareholder structure. From the central logo, dozens of branches reached out to satellite companies. In the middle of it all, one name stood out: Orion Events, the event management company behind everything, from securing venues to running the backstage. "They think power comes from speaking on stage," Celeste said, her smile tilting toward the sardonic. "But real power belongs to the one holding the keys to the boardroom." Thomas let out a knowing laugh. "And I'm guessing you just found the key holder?" Celeste didn't answer directly. Instead, she pressed a key, pulling up Orion Events executive contacts. One face in particular jumped out. Someone she'd once seen backstage at an awards show. The same person who had asked her back then if she needed a staff pass to get through the door. "I think it's time to return the invitation they got wrong," Celeste said, as if discussing dinner plans, not a corporate takeover. Thomas exhaled slowly, his chair creaking in the background. "Then let's begin." Celeste closed the file, her eyes resting on Orion's embossed logo. This wasn't the finish line, just the first lock in a chain. And once the first lock turned, the rest of the doors would open in ways no one at TechSphere could prepare for. The shareholder list read like a miniature power map. The first lines were full of familiar names, people who had once shaken her hand with polite smiles at conferences or stood across the room watching her like she was just another booth assistant. Celeste scrolled down slowly until she reached the names that truly mattered. One had publicly undermined her AI project at a panel, cloaking personal bias as professional skepticism. Another had smirked during her speech on diversifying leadership in tech. And there was the one who had flatly told her, "A company like yours will never get into the big leagues." Celeste read each name carefully, as if tasting the words again. Every name wasn't just a person. It was a memory, a line in the invisible ledger she kept. Her fingers moved to the keyboard. The cursor blinked over an empty field. She began typing. 3 plain words, no exclamation marks, no embellishment. "Begin acquisition plan." 3 words, carrying the weight of an entire chess game. They weren't just instructions for her legal and finance teams. They were a silent declaration of war to people who didn't yet know they were about to lose their grip on power. Behind her, Nora read the words. She lifted her head to speak, but Celeste's gaze stopped her. It wasn't a blazing, aggressive look, but one solid and unshakable, like granite. The look of someone who didn't need to raise her voice to assure you she would win. Outside the window, sunset softened the city in a wash of amber. Inside, the air was dense, not gentle, but heavy, like the moment before a storm when you can feel the wind shift. Celeste pressed Enter. The keystroke was sharp and clean. Instantly, the screen switched to emails and internal alerts. The machine had started moving, precisely oiled, waiting only for her signal. She shut the laptop, rose from her seat, and walked out without a single backward glance. No explanation, no ceremony, leaving Nora and the others in a silence thick enough to touch. They didn't know exactly where this plan would lead. But they all understood one thing. When Celeste Monroe started a plan, no one on that list would keep their place. And in a matter of days, TechSphere would no longer be the TechSphere they knew. The heavy wooden door closed behind Celeste, sealing off the city's noise. Inside, the room was just large enough to hold a long conference table, its polished wood gleaming under the warm amber light. There was no company logo, no presentation screen, nothing to suggest this was about to be the setting for a multi-million-dollar acquisition. On the table sat only a glass water carafe, a few crystal tumblers, and neatly stacked files. So precise it looked as if each millimeter had been measured. Every leather chair had already been pulled out to a precise position, as though the occupants had been pre-assigned long before anyone arrived. Celeste walked to her seat but didn't sit right away. She let her fingers drift across the cool surface, feeling the faint ridges of the grain. This was the kind of table where the fate of companies, and sometimes entire industries, was decided in just a few sentences. Across from her, 3 men in dark suits were already seated. They were representatives of Orion Events, the company running TechSphere from behind the scenes, but none of them ever stepped into the spotlight. They controlled the lighting and microphones, yet never appeared before the cameras. Celeste greeted them with a smile, warm enough to avoid seeming aloof, but never so familiar as to invite underestimation. One of them, silver-haired and wearing a gold watch, gave her a quick once-over before offering a curt nod. The silence in the room was different from the silence outside. It was heavy, not because anyone was hiding a secret, but because everyone understood the weight of what was about to be said. In rooms like this, silence was never empty. It was a tool sharper than any clause in a contract. She sat, crossed her legs, and set her handbag aside. No laptop, no legal pad. Just a pen and a slim folder, so slim it drew a faint crease of curiosity from the men across the table. One of them broke the silence first, his tone carrying a hint of mockery. No documents? You do know this is an acquisition discussion, not afternoon tea? Celeste twirled the pen between her fingers. Her smile didn't change, but her eyes glinted with something playful, like someone who wasn't sure whether they were the audience, or the subject of the joke. She didn't answer. Sometimes to control a room, you didn't need to speak first. You just had to make them wonder whether they'd said the right thing. When one of them leaned forward to repeat the question, Celeste tilted her head slightly, ready to deliver an opening line that would shift the entire conversation. The silver-haired man, clearly used to holding the upper hand, leaned in, hands clasped, as if lecturing a student who hadn't yet passed the course. Miss Monroe hosting an international caliber event isn't just about booking a stage and sending invitations. We create a space where the elite can exchange ideas, connect, and maintain the standard it's known for. He lingered on standard, a silk thread with the edge of a blade. In that moment, Celeste knew he wasn't talking about logistics. He was talking about who deserved to be inside and who didn't. She nodded and put her pen to the page. But it wasn't black or blue. It was a vivid neon pink. Each stroke stood out against the white paper, a silent reply impossible to ignore. His gaze caught on the color, pausing for just under a second, long enough for Celeste to know her point had landed. She kept writing as though his words were gospel. Another man, younger but equally self-assured, cut in. We always maintain high standards. Every guest is carefully vetted. Otherwise, the brand suffers. Celeste looked up, her eyes calm but carrying a depth that made his next words falter. High standards, I understand. She didn't challenge him outright. Instead, she wrote 3 words in bright pink. Standard. Who decides? The silver-haired man kept talking about how Orion safeguarded TechSphere's prestige, his pride swelling as if describing a national treasure. Celeste listened, nodding occasionally, but with each nod came a sharper, more deliberate dot of pink ink. The room's rhythm began to shift. The very words meant to assert their authority were becoming living proof of the bias Celeste had seen countless times. And they didn't even notice. When he finished, she set the pen down and closed her notebook. The smile she wore now was like a flawless mirror, reflecting everything that had just been said, revealing nothing of her own intent. I understand exactly how you maintain your standards. Thank you for the lesson. The words were light, free of sarcasm, yet they made all three men feel as if a mirror had been placed in front of them. Celeste's eyes drifted toward the window. The city below moved on, unaware. In her mind, the steps of this deal had already aligned into a straight path, one that ended somewhere none of these men could imagine. Her phone vibrated once, breaking the stillness. A message from Thomas appeared. Done! You own it. No sharp inhale, no raised brow. She simply set the pen down and allowed the smallest smile. A smile with the weight of a curtain about to rise, revealing a stage only she had seen. Across the table, the men hadn't yet realized the shift. They still believed they were in control, that this meeting was merely to evaluate a potential investor. Celeste let them believe it. For now. She closed her notebook, the neon pink lines inside like slices of the words they had just handed her. Her fingertips brushed the cover as she locked eyes with the silver-haired man. Thank you for sharing so much. It's been very useful to my plan. He nodded smug, as if he'd imparted something precious. No one asked what her plan was, a mistake they would soon regret. Celeste rose, slipping the pink pen into her bag. Her movements were unhurried, every sound. The soft thump of leather on wood, the faint scrape of her chair, etched into the air. As she passed, one of them said, "We look forward to a smooth collaboration." She paused mid-step, glanced over her shoulder with a faint smile. "Oh, I'm sure you do. It's just, my definition of collaboration might be a little different from yours." Then she moved on, leaving three puzzled faces behind. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone again and replied to Thomas. "Stage 2 begins now." Sliding the phone back into her bag, she stepped into the elevator, the image of those men fading behind the closing steel doors. The space was small, but inside a quiet surge of energy rose. As the elevator descended, she closed her eyes briefly, picturing the moment TechSphere's doors would open to her, not with a pass, but with ownership. A soft ding announced her floor. Celeste stepped out, merging into the crowd in the lobby. But among all those people, she alone knew that from now on, every decision at TechSphere would pass through her hands. And somewhere in this city, the people who once believed they ran the game were about to learn they'd been pieces on the board all along. The dressing room was drenched in bright white light, bouncing off a row of mirrors so long, it felt as if an endless number of Celestes stood quietly, staring back at one another. On the table, jewelry boxes lay half open, catching the glow in glittering shards. Racks of garments lined the wall, each piece swathed in a thin cream-colored cover, radiating the sense that everything here had been chosen with surgical precision. Nora, Celeste's assistant, stood in the center of the room, holding two options, one in each hand. In her left, a blazing red evening gown, the satin cascading like molten velvet, promising to command every eye the moment it entered a room. In her right, a minimalist black suit, its lines as sharp as a blade, tailored so cleanly there wasn't a single thread out of place. "Do you want to arrive like a storm?" Nora asked, lifting the red gown higher. "Or like a wind no one hears, but everyone knows has passed?" Celeste didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the mirror, brushing her fingers along the red gown before pausing at the black suit. The eyes in the reflection weren't weighing color or cut. They were calculating outcomes. The reactions, the whispers, the headlines she knew would follow. "Red will make them see me instantly," Celeste said evenly, "but black will make them wonder why they can't look away." Nora smiled faintly, returning the red gown to its hanger. She knew Celeste had never been one for loud entrances. Her power lay in leaving a space open for others to fill with their own assumptions. And in the vulnerability of that imagination, they lowered their guard. Celeste sat down, leaning slightly so Nora could measure her shoulders. In the silence, she watched her own posture in the mirror. Back straight, chin lifted, eyes forward. Not to flaunt power, but to make it clear she never had to prove it. "Suit, then," Nora confirmed. Celeste nodded. "Suit. Polished enough to command respect, understated enough to make them wonder if they're as rich as they think." Nora chuckled. That was Celeste's way, making others waste time guessing her thoughts while she'd already mapped out the ending, before they even asked the first question. Celeste stood, fastening each button slowly like sealing layers of a script, ready to be opened at the precise moment. Outside the window, the city was sinking into gold light. Somewhere, the TechSphere organizers probably still believed they were directing the upcoming press event. They didn't know they were about to become the uninvited audience to a show Celeste had been producing all along. "Which one makes them both respect you and question their own wealth?" Celeste murmured, eyes still fixed on the mirror. The question landed like a command already decided. Nora understood instantly, hung the red dress back, and brought the black suit forward. When the cool fabric touched her shoulders, Celeste closed her eyes for a few seconds. In that dim, private space, a wordless rhythm began to play, not from the dressing room speakers, but from her memory. A slow, heavy beat, like the sound of a heart crossing a door someone had tried to keep shut. She remembered meetings where she'd been the only person of color in the room. The eyes that sized her up before she spoke. The polite, shallow compliments once she proved she knew more than expected. Nights she came home not exhausted by the work itself, but by the double load it took just to be considered equal. The black suit wasn't just clothing, it was armor. Not ostentatious, but strong enough to withstand every stare, every needless question, every bias wrapped in sugar. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly, pulling the zipper. "And dangerous in a very Celeste way." Celeste opened her eyes, studying herself. The suit framed her shoulders, cutting straight to the hip, leaving no space for anyone to see her as a supporting character. Danger's easy. The trick is making them not realize they're in danger. Nora laughed quietly and adjusted the collar. In the mirror, the two women met eyes, one fully aware of the battle ahead, the other ready to stand beside her, even without knowing the whole plan. Celeste turned, taking a few measured steps. The click of her heels on the wooden floor was steady, rehearsing for an entrance that would silence the room. With each step, she pictured the faces of those who had barred her from TechSphere, and the moment they would realize their mistake. As Nora tidied the hangers, she asked, "Do you want to give anyone at the press conference a heads up? So they're ready?" Celeste shrugged, a smile tilting toward the edge of mockery. "No, preparation is a privilege you earn. I prefer they learn from surprise." The air in the dressing room dropped a degree. Not with tension, but with the scent of a chess match approaching its unexpected turn. Celeste fastened the final button, standing tall. Nora nodded slowly as if stamping the decision in place. Outside, daylight was fading into the glow of the city's lamps. Somewhere in that grid of light, the people who believed they held all the power had no idea they'd been cast as extras in tomorrow's scene. Celeste left the dressing room, her steps measured as if each one had been plotted. The hallway's thick carpet muted the sound, its walls lined with black and white photos of prestigious conferences. Each framed moment was a world she had once been kept out of, and now nothing more than backdrop for her path forward. A black limousine waited under the awning, raindrops from an earlier shower still clinging to its surface. The driver opened the door, bowing slightly, his eyes flicking to the new suit and the presence of the woman wearing it. Celeste said nothing, just dipped her head and stepped inside. The faint scent of real leather mingled with a light floral note from a small diffuser in the corner. The door closed, shutting out the world, leaving only the smooth hum of the engine. Celeste crossed her legs, resting her hands on her knee, not yet reaching for her phone. The car glided through familiar streets, passing buildings that glowed gold against the evening. When it stopped across from the conference center, Celeste lowered the window. From here, TechSphere's facade stretched across her view. LED letters scrolled the announcement for the upcoming session, glowing like the declaration of people certain they controlled the game. Large banners flanked the steps, each bearing the face of an invited speaker, none of them Celeste Monroe. She studied the scene, committing every detail to memory. The light's hue, the position of the entrances, the pacing of the security guards. These weren't for admiration, they were for use. Leaning back, she allowed the faintest smile. "Their stage is soon to be mine." Her tone held no trace of anger, only the certainty of someone who had already seen the ending. She didn't just want to stand on their stage. She wanted to rewrite the entire script, making the audience, including those in the VIP seats, realize they'd been sitting in the wrong place all along. The window slid shut, cutting off the view. Celeste closed her eyes for a moment, then opened her phone, scrolling through messages from Thomas, Nora, the legal team, all confirming that the gears of her plan were turning on schedule. Outside, the banners still gleamed. The stairs still welcomed guests. No one knew that soon. Everything they proudly displayed to the world would serve as the backdrop to another story. A story with Celeste as both author and lead. The limousine turned down another street, melting into the evening traffic. In the glow of the city, the conference center shrank in the rearview mirror. But in Celeste's mind, the stage loomed larger, waiting for the exact moment the curtain would fall. White spotlights swept across the rows of seats like cold, unblinking eyes. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts, each flash a sharp blade slicing through the already tense air. Reporters jostled for the best angle, their whispers interlaced with the rustle of papers and the steady clatter of laptop keys. The TechSphere Hall gleamed, staged to project an image of flawless prestige. A backdrop printed with the Orion Events logo stretched across the rear wall of the stage. The front row brimmed with familiar faces, organizers, sponsors, speakers, each dressed as though their clothing was part of a carefully curated power statement. But the restless energy in the room wasn't about who sat where. It was about why this press conference was happening at all. The invitation email sent just the night before contained only 7 words. Important announcement. Mandatory attendance. No reason, no topic, no hints. In this world, that meant only 2 possibilities: the unveiling of a massive investment opportunity or the arrival of a storm. Stage left, the same security manager who had blocked Celeste at the conference entrance days earlier stood with arms crossed, scanning the audience. He didn't know why he'd been invited to the front row, and the thought barely lingered before being drowned out by camera flashes and bright lights. Behind the black curtain, Celeste stood still, fingers brushing the collar of her black suit. No notes, no pre-fitted microphone. Everything she needed to say was in her head, and more importantly, secured in the ownership she now held. She could hear the MC's voice, steady but cautious, straining to maintain the illusion of a routine press event. The pauses between sentences gave it away. He wasn't entirely sure what he was introducing. Out in the seats, guesses swirled in low murmurs. Rumors of a merger or a surprise keynote from a celebrity speaker. Each theory carried a mix of excitement and unease, as if the whole room balanced on the edge of either a celebration or a scandal. Celeste drew a deep breath and stepped toward the stage edge. When she emerged, the spotlights instantly tracked her, and the room went so still the camera clicks sounded like a metronome. No one knew it yet, but this moment would split TechSphere's story in 2. Before Celeste Monroe and after. And in just seconds, they would realize this press conference wasn't here to announce. It was here to change the game entirely. She walked to center stage, neither rushing nor dragging her steps. The lighting carved the black suit into razor-sharp lines. For a beat, even the relentless cameras hesitated, as though the photographers needed to refocus to make sure they weren't mistaken. She stopped, sweeping her gaze across the audience. Without raising her voice, every word still rang clear. 3 days ago, I was stopped here because I wasn't a real guest. Murmurs spread like ink soaking into paper. A few heads dipped together in hushed exchange. Some faces stiffened. Celeste didn't give them time to settle. From her inner pocket, she drew a sleek, silver-white card. With a flick, the bold word "owner" caught the light. She held it just long enough for the cameras to capture it. Silence dropped over the hall, so heavy she could hear the breaths of the front row. A soft squeak of fabric as someone shifted in their seat. A faint inhale from the middle row. Celeste turned the card once in her hand, as if admiring a new piece of jewelry before slipping it back into her suit. I don't need an invitation anymore. I own the conference. A few coughs broke out, thin veils over discomfort. In the VIP row, an organizer's hand drifted toward a phone, then froze as Celeste's eyes locked onto his. The flashes began again, fiercer this time. Not to document a scheduled event, but because the journalists knew they were witnessing a turning point. Celeste let the moment breathe. Then she leaned slightly toward the microphone. When someone tells you you don't belong here, let them believe it. Then come back with the deed in your hand. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a blade's cold edge. A sentence that stripped away the false security of anyone who thought they had the authority to decide who could walk through a door. In the far left row, the security manager sat up straighter, as if suddenly aware that he was no longer the gatekeeper, just a guest occupying someone else's space. Celeste lowered the microphone, letting the silence settle once more. But this time, it wasn't the silence of old power. It was the silence of a new order. And the audience, whether they liked it or not, would have to sit still for her next act. Her gaze landed on the front row, on the same security manager whose posture was rigid now, but whose unease was unmistakable. Just days ago, he had stood between her and the conference doors, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he knew exactly who belonged. Now, under the stage lights, his face showed every tightened line of retreat. Celeste took her time, letting the seconds stretch like a conductor holding a rest before a crashing note. The crowd began to sense where her eyes had settled, and a ripple of whispers spread from the middle rows outward. She stepped forward once, her focus unwavering. "I remember you," she said, her tone even, as if recalling an old story. "3 days ago, you said, 'This area is for real guests only.'" Pens and recorders twitched to life among the press. They knew the next line could be headline material. Celeste tilted her head slightly, a small smile breaking. Less a gesture of warmth than of certainty that the power dynamic had just flipped. "Today, I'm here to say the same thing, only a bit more literally." She paused, the stage lights glinting off the polished floor. "This area from now on really is only for those who belong." The words slid out lightly without force, but their weight froze the room. The security manager swallowed hard, his eyes flicking around for an anchor that wasn't there. Faces in the VIP row shifted. Some smirked. Not in joy, but in recognition that Celeste had just handed back the exact humiliation she'd received days before, this time in front of the entire hall. Celeste took a single step back, offering no further comment. She let the silence grow again, forcing each person to interpret it for themselves. For him, it was a rebuke. For the rest, it was a reminder that the boundaries of belonging can shift in an instant, and no one is untouchable. She turned and walked toward the wings. Camera shutters erupted like fireworks, chasing her every move. But Celeste never looked back, leaving them with the image of a straight-backed silhouette, moving without hesitation. Behind the curtain, Nora was waiting, eyes full of unasked questions, but voicing only one. "What's next?" Celeste smiled, undoing her jacket. "We still have one more act." And in that moment, everyone knew. This story was nowhere near its end. Celeste remained at the edge of the stage, the lights carving her black suit into even sharper lines. Her gaze swept the room, then stopped at the front row, on the security manager, frozen as if bolted to his seat. She tilted her head, a fleeting smile passing across her face. Polite enough to avoid being called provocative, but pointed enough to make him feel as though the entire hall was waiting for something to happen. "Would you mind joining me up here for a moment?" The murmurs began instantly. Several photographers swung their cameras toward the front row. Those seated nearby shifted aside, unconsciously making space for him to step out, almost as if they wanted a better view of whatever was about to unfold. The man rose slowly, eyes flicking around before he was forced to make his way toward the stage. Each step seemed longer than necessary, his shoes striking the floor with a dry, hollow sound, blending with the relentless clicks of the press. Celeste stood where she was, waiting. When he reached the first stair, she took a half step back and extended her hand, the exact gesture of a gracious host welcoming a guest. The formality froze the room for a heartbeat. Not because it was respectful, but because no one could tell if she was offering flowers or a knife. "Thank you," she said lightly as he joined her. "I think everyone should know who this is." A wave of whispers rippled through the seats. Some recognized him, but no one yet understood why he was center stage. Celeste pivoted slightly, turning them both toward the audience like a master of ceremonies introducing the keynote speaker. In that perfectly staged posture, her eyes held something else. Not outright hostility, not quite warmth. It was the look of a magician holding a hidden card, waiting for the exact moment to reveal it. The security manager stood beside her, shoulders tight, his smile stiff. He could feel hundreds of eyes on him, and he had no idea what she would say next. Celeste let the pause hang, inhaled softly, and began. Her voice was not loud, but each word fell with the precision of the first drops before a storm. And everyone knew. This would not be an ordinary introduction. This would be the moment where courtesy became a strike no one could dodge. She turned slightly toward him, her expression impossibly calm. The smile was small, subtle, a breeze laced with the edge of a blade. If you'd be so kind, this area is only for those who truly belong. It came out gently without force or emphasis, yet the weight of it landed like a silent slap. No one in the room misunderstood. A sharp intake of breath traveled through the hall like a chain reaction. His polite smile wavered, his lips trembling slightly. One hand closed loosely, his thumb rubbing over his forefinger as if searching for something solid to hold onto. It was not just a reminder. It was the perfect inversion of the exact phrase he had used to stop her at the conference doors days ago. Then he had believed he held the authority to decide who belonged. Now he stood on stage, beside the new owner, hearing those same words. Only this time, they carried the weight of ownership. A few in the VIP row exchanged glances, lips pressed tight to hide smiles. The press worked furiously, scribbling and shooting, knowing this was tomorrow's lead story. Celeste's gaze swept the crowd, not triumphant, not smug, just a quiet assertion of the new order, delivered with politeness and a controlled tone that outmatched any shout. The man beside her couldn't leave, not yet, and that was the cruelest part. He had to stand there in the light, part of a story he could no longer control. The silence between them became theater, with Celeste as director and him, willing or not, playing his part. She didn't drag it out, just one step back, a slight gesture toward his seat, gracious enough to deny anyone the chance to call it an insult. Yet the velvet wrapping only made the blow land deeper. He returned to the front row, each step heavier than the ones up. Celeste stayed still, her eyes following him until he sat down. And in that moment, the entire hall understood. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a lesson, and they had all just been enrolled. The first laugh came from the far corner, quickly spreading into a ripple. Some chuckled softly, not wanting to show allegiance too openly. Others laughed freely, delighted by the perfect reversal. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then swelling, each clap, another exclamation mark stamped into the charged air. Chairs shifted, fabric rustled as people stood to see better. Camera lenses tracked Celeste, capturing even her smallest movements. Flashes popped like fireworks, each one trying to freeze the instant for the record. I was there when it happened. Celeste didn't rush to acknowledge the praise. She let it play out like background music she had orchestrated in advance. Her eyes weren't on the cheering crowd. They were fixed on the exit backstage. Under the blinding lights, her black suit formed a clean, sharp silhouette, like a precise cut through the noisy colors around her. She turned, walking with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step set firmly into the wooden floor. No bow, no wave. That indifference was its own declaration that she needed no crowd's approval because she already held what they could never give. As she reached the stage's edge, the light ahead dimmed. Her footsteps blended with the shuffle of chairs, hushed murmurs, and the mechanical adjustments for the next segment. Then, as she stepped into the shadows behind the curtain, the stage lights snapped off completely, severing her from the room in an instant. Backstage, the air was different. Cooler, darker, so still she could hear the hum of the ventilation. Nora stood there, a bottle of water in hand, though she seemed to forget to offer it. Her eyes followed Celeste, not with questions, but with the clear awareness that what had just happened would be spoken of for years. Celeste rested a hand on Nora's shoulder, giving a small nod. No compliments, no thanks. Just an unspoken confirmation that the game was moving exactly as she intended. From the hall came the lingering sounds of delayed laughter, scattered applause, the aftershock of a strike the other side hadn't seen coming. Celeste glanced toward the hallway leading to the rear exit, where a wash of warm yellow light spilled in. She still had one last move to make before leaving. And that move would make everything so far feel like nothing more than the prelude. The limousine pulled away from the venue, gliding through the night streets that shimmered like a river of light, winding through the city's heart. From the back seat, Celeste leaned her head lightly against the window, feeling the smooth hum of the engine blend with the distant city sounds. The honk of traffic, the low murmur of late-night cafes, the muffled footsteps weaving into the music spilling from open bar doors. Outside office towers still burned with light on a few scattered floors, solitary islands in a sea of darkness. She watched them drift past, unhurried, deliberate, no camera flashes, no hundreds of eyes following her, no fake handshakes, only silence. The kind of silence that can feel either hollow or complete. Across from her, Nora sat with a tablet open to the financial newsfeed. Headlines had already started rolling in. New owner of TechSphere revealed. From rejection to ownership. Celeste Monroe and the lesson of quiet power. She glanced at Celeste, waiting for a smirk, a sharp remark. But Celeste simply closed the screen with a flick, as if she had read those words long before they were written. The city's warm yellow lights gradually gave way to the cooler blues of emptier streets. The limousine drifted into a calmer space, far from the downtown rush. Celeste rotated her wrist, unfastened the watch she'd worn since morning, and placed it on the small side table. A simple act, yet it carried the weight of lowering the curtain on a play. No one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was a tacit agreement. Here, no one had to perform. Celeste closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. To her steady heartbeat, to the rhythmic roll of the tires, to the faint echo of her time on stage only hours earlier. Inside her was not the high of noisy triumph, but a steady current, a sense of having laid a solid stone into the foundation of a power no one could easily take away. And in that stillness, she knew the game was far from over. Everything tonight was just the opening move towards something that would teach her opponents that silence could be the loudest drum. She slipped off her heels, setting them neatly aside. The plush carpet met her bare feet, and a lightness spread through her, like shedding the last mask of the evening. Her head rested against the seat, eyes fixed on the dim ceiling above. No more acting. No more holding anything back. In the quiet, the images from earlier returned, the glances of those who had once laughed, once scanned her up and down as if inspecting a product behind glass. They had spoken with half smiles and slow, deliberate tones, heavy with implication. But tonight in that hall, they had sat still. No interruptions, no polite coughs to break the moment. That silence was the sweetest sound Celeste had ever heard. Nora, usually reserved, couldn't hold back. You made them swallow their own words. Celeste's smile was faint, wordless. To her, that moment wasn't for gloating, but for engraving. Not for revenge, but as proof that power games are often nothing more than the slow shifting of eyes, from looking down on you to watching you warily. Beyond the glass, technology billboards slid past. She remembered the countless times she had been pushed to the edges of industry events, standing against the wall like an outsider at her own table. The times she'd been mistaken for a server or event staff, even though her business card read CEO. The irony was sharp. These same people saw themselves as the hands guiding the future of tech. But they didn't realize the balance was already tilting, and it tilted while they still believed themselves untouchable. Celeste turned her gaze outward again, the streetlight casting half her face in gold, the other in shadow. She thought about how real power never needs to shout for acknowledgement. All it takes is one precise strike, and letting the silence afterward do the rest. A phone vibration broke her thoughts. A message from Thomas. Market reaction exceeding forecasts. We'll discuss in the morning. Celeste read it, then closed the phone. No need to answer tonight. This wasn't a night for business. This was a night to savor the aftertaste of a victory that required no second blow. But she knew. This quiet win was only the first layer. What came next would not just silence the tech industry, it would rewrite how they saw someone like her, forever. Sometimes a win doesn't need fireworks, just a door, and the key in your hand. Her voice was low, steady, each word dropping like a pebble into still water, sending a quiet ripples outward. Nora blinked once, as if filing the sentence away for later. Outside, the city kept moving. A couple huddled together at a late-night food stand, steam curling from a pot of soup. A flower seller wrapped the last tulips of the day. Traffic lights blinked red, yellow, green, like the pulse of a giant organism. The world kept turning, but for Celeste, everything had changed hue. She reached out, touched the glass, and saw her reflection staring back. Not the face of a woman who had just won, but of someone holding a power that no longer needed to be displayed. A quiet power, more enduring than any round of applause. The limousine turned onto a narrow street, so still the sound of its tires brushing the road could be heard. Celeste tilted her head, letting the darkness cover half her face. In that shadow, a new thought began to form. Not a plan for payback, but a blueprint for something bigger, longer lasting. Perhaps she thought real power isn't proving someone wrong in the moment. It's turning that moment into a launch pad, opening doors that others once kept locked. And this time, when the door opened, no one would have the power to shut it again. Nora glanced at her as if to ask what was on her mind. Celeste only smiled, an ambiguous smile that could spark a dozen theories. Some questions she knew are best answered with silence. The car's sound system shifted to a soft jazz track, the saxophone's low, warm notes stretching like the slow turn of a key in a lock. Not to keep anyone out, but to protect what was inside. The limousine rolled on, disappearing into the night like a perfectly placed period at the end of a sentence. But the story, Celeste knew, was far from finished. Somewhere out there, in those lit-up buildings, there were still people who thought they held the keys. And when they realized the truth had already shifted, that would be the moment the next game began. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.